Behind me is London City Airport, an airport that's well known for having an approach which is significantly steeper than most other commercial airport approaches anywhere in the world. So let's see what makes this approach so special, who's allowed to fly this approach, and come along with me as I fly this approach for real on a British Airways flight. So why is the approach at London City Airport so steep, and what actually constitutes a steep approach anyway? Well, let's answer the first question first. And if you think that you need to have a steep approach so you're higher when you're closer to the airport because of all the tall buildings around here in London, then that's kind of the reason, but it's also not the entire reason. Yes, a steep approach obviously does mean that you have more clearance over obstacles when you are coming into an airport like London City, which is in the middle of a very densely populated area. So obviously clearance and more height above the buildings on final approach is a good thing. But as I said, that's not the only reason why. Then you might think, well, it's because of the length of the runway, because London City Airport does have a runway that is actually shorter than other commercial airports. And if you have a steeper approach, it means you can land further back down the runway. You don't have to have what we call a displaced threshold because of obstacles, so you can use up more of the runway that's available. But it's not just the fact that you have tall buildings and obstacles around, it's not just also the fact that you have a short runway length, it's a combination of those two things. And one other thing that I didn't actually consider until I was researching this video, which is the noise issue. London City Airport is obviously in, well, it's the most densely populated part of the United Kingdom, right here in central London, and you have a lot of residential buildings all around the airport and more being built every day. And so the noise from the aircraft is obviously a consideration for the residents, and by having a steeper approach, it means that the aircraft is further away from those residential buildings as it is approaching, especially through where I am at the moment. And even if London City Airport could in the future reduce the height of the approach, make it less steep, which is actually something that they're looking at, and I'll come to that a little bit later in this video, but even if they could do that, because there are so many people living around who've been used to the level of noise that they have, or the lack of noise that they have currently, maybe bringing the aircraft closer to the ground on that short final approach, closer to the residential buildings, might not go down very well with the people that do live around the airport. So just how steep then is London City Airport's approach? Well, a normal aircraft flying a normal instrument approach will generally fly a glide slope of 3 degrees. Here at London City, the glide slope is actually 5.5 degrees, nearly twice as steep. Now, it might not sound like a huge difference, 3 to 5.5 degrees, but from the cockpit, it completely changes the way you fly the aircraft. With a steeper approach, the aircraft is descending faster, so speed management becomes critical. The sight picture out of the front window, that is how the runway actually looks to you, is different, which is tricky to adapt to in the daytime and much harder at night. And because you are descending to the runway more quickly, the round out and flare before you actually touch the wheels to the ground have to be timed a lot more precisely. Get it wrong and you risk either landing firmly or floating well beyond your touchdown point on an already short runway. That's why pilots simply can't turn up and fly into London City. They need specific training and approval to fly this unique approach because of the noise constraints, the runway length, and all of the obstacles out to the west. It would be reasonable to question then whether the steep approach that exists on this side to avoid the tall buildings that are here to keep the aircraft higher up so they're not as noisy for the residents, whether that steep approach exists on the other side of the airport, because you don't have as many tall buildings and it's not as densely populated, so noise shouldn't be so much of an issue. And it's an interesting question, and when I researched it and looked at some of the IFR approach charts for London City Airport, I could actually see that surprisingly, no, it's exactly the same. You still have a 5.5 degree glide slope approach on the other side of the airport as well. And when I dug into it a little bit more, I actually worked out, I believe that the primary reason why you have it on both sides of the airfield is simply for standardization. If you have a steep approach on one side of the airfield, but a regular 3 degree glide slope on the other side, then some pilots could technically fly an approach into one side of the airport. But obviously if the direction of the runways changed, then those pilots wouldn't be certified to fly into the other side. So to keep things standard, to make sure that pilots aren't getting confused between the two sides, and to make sure that only pilots that are certified to fly that steep approach can land at London City Airport, the 5.5 degrees steep approach actually is irrespective of which runway direction you're landing on. It's not just the pilots themselves that need special approval to land at London City Airport, the actual aircraft that they're flying do as well. When London City first opened back in 1987 with its shorter runway, only a few true short takeoff and landing aircraft like the de Havilland Dash 7, Dornier 228 could operate in and out of London City. When the runway was extended in 1992 and the approach angle was reduced to 5.5 degrees, that opened the door for larger aircraft like the Airbus A220 and Embraer E190. As recently as 2021, the Embraer E190-E2, the newer variant of the Brazilian aircraft, also received its certification to fly in and out of here as well. So new aircraft are being added, but even today, many of the world's most common short-haul airliners still can't land here, although that might not always be the case, because London City Airport are working on a new plan that could allow larger, more modern aircraft to fly in and out of London City. London City Airport started off with a very steep 7.5 degree approach that went down to a 5.5 degree approach when the runway was extended. Could it ever come down any further is the final question. And the interesting answer to that is yes, and it actually probably will do in the not too distant future, because London City Airport have already put in a new proposal for a satellite-based approach to the airport. This would be using GPS technology to navigate aircraft into London City Airport, and it would mean that they'd be able to reduce the angle of descent from 5.5 degrees down to 4.49 degrees. Now, not only would this potentially open up the airport to more pilots to be able to come in, but more interestingly, it also means that some of the newer generation, more efficient, larger aircraft could also then potentially land at London City in the future as well. With the new satellite-based approach, this means that aircraft like the newer A320neo, for example, could potentially be certified to land at the airport in the future. And this leads us to quite an interesting part of the story, because aircraft, one of the reasons why they're held up at that steep approach angle, as we've discussed before, is because of noise. But now London City is saying they're going to reduce that angle and potentially have bigger aircraft coming in. So does that not mean that the noise issue will be even worse in the future? Well, what they're saying is no, it will actually be better, because larger aircraft can be flying in. It means that less aircraft in total will be flying into London City in the future, despite the passenger numbers increasing. I don't know if that's a bit of marketing spin or not, but when flying the approach to London City Airport from the east, which I'm doing right now on this British Airways Embraer E190, once you've passed the Dartford River crossing, the aircraft then settles at a height of 2,000 feet and we fly what's called a downwind leg, which is basically flying with the airport to the right-hand side in a parallel direction to the runway that we want to land on, but flying in the opposite direction. Now you can fly along with me using my Garmin Pilot electronic flight bag, and the key thing to note is the altitude that we're maintaining, and you can see that in the box here at the top. So after our downwind leg, we then make a turn onto what's called the base leg, which is a right-hand turn, getting us ready to join the localizer for the runway that we're landing on. Once we start to see the localizer coming alive, which basically means we're almost lined up with the runway, we then make a final right-hand turn to line the aircraft up with the runway. You can clearly see the Shard, that's the tall building on the south bank of the Thames here, but interestingly, you can see we haven't actually descended yet. We're still maintaining 2,000 feet, even though we're only 4 and a bit miles away from the airport. This is where the pilot's looking out for that glide slope, that 5.5 degree glide slope to come in, and the moment it does, now you can see we've started our descent into London City Airport. It is a little bit hard, I will admit, to see how steep the approach is just from these visuals, but in the space of only a couple of minutes we go from 2,000 feet with the big buildings to the right hand side of us, past the Millennium Dome, and in this short space of time the pilot has to make sure they're lined up with the runway and get themselves ready for the round out, and if they've got their speeds nailed like they did on the approach that we were flying here, no floating down the runway, but a smooth yet positive touchdown on the runway surface.
A very warm welcome to London City Airport, where the local time is just approaching 22:11 in the morning. Please remain seated with your seatbelts fastened until the fasten seatbelt sign has been switched off. When it's safe to do so, please take care.
Whatever happens to London City Airport's approach in the future, whether it stays at 5.5 degrees, whether they get it down to 4.49 degrees, I'm just glad that it's not a standard regular 3-degree glide slope, because despite the amazing satellite technology that us pilots have access to, despite the amazing avionics in the cockpit that we can use to land aircraft, even when we have to fly a steep approach, I'm just really glad that this approach still exists, because yes, it's fun to fly as a pilot, and yes, any workload that's taken off in the cockpit is obviously a good thing. But from a purely passenger's perspective, I still think it's really cool that you can fly a super steep approach into one of the busiest and biggest cities in the world, because I thoroughly enjoyed that today.
Airways, I'd like to thank you once again for choosing to fly with us today, and we do look forward to seeing you all very soon. Thank you, and we hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.